You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamamia podcast.
Stephanie Rodriguez was at a work conference in Nigeria in 2020 when she got bitten by a mosquito. At the time, she didn't think anything of it because how many times have you been bitten by a mosquito? Mozzies are annoying. Scratch, forget about it. But 2 weeks later, when Stephanie was in America on a whirlwind holiday with a girlfriend, she collapsed on the floor of the airport just a few hours before they were due to come home. And 24 hours later, the single mother and entrepreneur was in a coma in a Boston hospital with a 2% chance of surviving.
So they were working on me doing the bathing ritual, changing my plumbing, how elegant. And one's asking the other if she's going to this end-of-life seminar next week. That, I'm like, end of life, holy hell. Am I in palliative care?
From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name's Mia Friedman. Steph has been through more in the past 2 years than most of us. And what I've told you so far is only the start of her story. Where she's at now is a whole other level of remarkable. 2 years on from her sliding doors moment when she got bitten by the mosquito, she's about to give her first TED Talk. But before she does, here on No Filter, sitting right across from me in the Mamamia podcast studio, Stephanie Rodriguez has a story to tell. Steph, we met a couple of years ago because you had invented this incredible personal safety device and you were seeking funding and you were developing it and selling it, and it was amazing. And then the next thing I heard from you, you were traveling to talk with the UN, or you were traveling to Africa. What happened in Africa? Because this is a story that starts with a mosquito bite and ends in a double amputation. So what were you doing there?
I went to give a talk on the 17th SDG, a workshop for young Africans at a conference called Hive. So I flew over for that and a couple of startup events to look for partnerships and to open roads basically on the continent.
So you had a great trip in Africa. You came home. You'd won a raffle where you'd won tickets to go to see a baseball game, and you were taking a very good friend of yours, and you had a ridiculous turnaround of coming back from Africa, and 24 hours later you were on a plane with your friend to America.
That's right.
What happened when you got there?
When we got to America, we arrived on a Thursday night, just went to bed and dinner. Then on Friday, I had a couple of conference calls, and then we had a lunch with a woman from the U.S. State Department's Women in Security Council that I'm a member of, Carrie. And so we had a lunch with Carrie and her mom. We did a podcast episode, went for a walk.
How are you feeling?
I was tired.
Understandable.
After Africa, I went to India. So I did the same trip in India. So Africa, India, Melbourne, Canberra, LA, Boston. I flew more than 40,000 kilometers in 2 weeks.
So no wonder you were tired.
I thought it was jet lag.
I can't imagine you being tired or jet lagged. From what I know of you, you are a pocket rocket.
Well, I think it's only human, but knowing that I had a bit of congestion, which I thought was what I call airplane flu, from too much recycled oxygen over and over, and dry sinuses.
And this is pre-COVID.
Yep. So I wasn't afraid that I had anything. And my friend tells me that I was, off, and she saw me feverish, but my soldier on kind of attitude was knowing that I didn't want to go, and she really wanted me to go to a clinic, urgent care. And I just went, you don't understand the American healthcare system. If we go to an emergency room and we're not acute, like my arm is not hanging off, we're going to sit there all weekend, and it's going to defeat the purpose. So I just wanted to get through it, have a good time with my friend and get home.
So you decided to go to the airport early. You wouldn't see a doctor. What are your memories of getting to the airport and what happened after that?
The whole day, that Sunday, is a bit of a blur. When we went through the security lines of TSA in America, I have both APEC and TSA pre-check, so I'm in the short queue and expedited.
So you're a VIP when it comes to traveling.
I do enough of it, or did enough of it, that I had every hack there was to travel under my belt. But Liz tells me that I was very slow, so much so that I was annoying passengers behind me. I was like moving through butter. Yeah. And she just found that very off character for me. And that was making her worry even worse. She's like, who the heck are you? Where is my friend?
Do you remember what happened in the lounge?
No. No, and it's probably hidden deep in PTSD because it wasn't pretty, but I don't recall a lot of that experience. I don't recall, falling in, having a seizure or being ambulanced to the hospital, none of that.
We'll have to pick up Liz's account at this point because she was there with you.
Mm-hmm.
You were about to get on a plane back to Australia. She says she went to get you some more water, and as she was at the bar, someone came up and said, you got to get some help for your friend. What did she find when she got back?
She found me unresponsive. I apparently was beginning to foam at the mouth. How elegant. Wow. And shaking, like convulsing. And I wasn't choking, but it was pretty horrific for her. Turns out the fellow that went up to her in the bar happened to be a doctor. So when she found me, she just started screaming, is there a doctor? Is anyone, please help my friend. And the gentleman rushed over. And then there was a second doctor, a woman, who was also in the Delta Lounge in Logan Airport at the time. And she came to the scene and they began to one was taking a medical history from Liz, like, what if your friend had? The other one was making sure I wasn't choking, put me in the recovery position. And then, the commotion alerted the Delta staff. And then they came over and called the airport marshals and the ambulance crew to come in at that time.
You were evacuated, I guess, from the airport. I mean, thank God you hadn't got on the plane.
Yeah. And that is really kind of the miracle, Mia, because had I have, my heart would have exploded when the cabin pressurized. So I was that sick.
And you were that close.
Yeah. It was literally sliding doors kind of moments.
So you were rushed to the hospital. Your friend was by your side.
Yep.
What's her recollection of what happened after that?
Oh, it's horrific. I write about it in my book, Thank You, Mrs. Carter, that's coming out.
Is it upsetting for me to ask you that?
No, because, having to write the book and talk through it with Liz many times, and there has been PTSD probably for her as well as me, what she went through watching her friend nearly die. And no one prepares or packs for that when you're going for a 4-day girls' weekend. And especially someone who is as seasoned of a traveler as me was quite a shock for her. So, it was pretty traumatic. They got me in the ambulance and an African-American woman was the person inside the bus going with us. She's like, we're going to take the best care of your friend. And she was very reassuring. They were calling me a stroke victim, which made no sense for me at my age and otherwise healthy to have this. So when we got there, they started trying to find vitals and looking at a very rapidly deteriorating human and then asking Liz kind of what I had and what I'd eaten. And one doctor, which I find really fascinating, this procedure, he got with Liz, they went through my social medias and he was triaging on a piece of paper, like, what could this be? Wow. Meanwhile, they're testing for meningococcal. Then they turn to Liz and say, how do you feel? And then she's like, why? And they were, well, she's been to Africa. It could be something airborne. And they came at me in hazmat suits and were like, are you fine? And she's like, no, I'm fine. I've been sleeping in the same hotel room with her and flew next to her. I'm perfect.
So they thought it could be Ebola. It could be.
Exactly. So they were testing for all these things. The uniqueness is that one of my business partners in WanderSafe happens to be a doctor. And he, in his studies in the British West Indies as a med student, he's a biochemist, worked on the Gates Foundation developing artesunate, which is the drug that you kill malaria once it's in the body.
Who did Liz call?
Liz called Dr. Zach and her parents.
She called her own parents.
Yeah.
She called your business partner because he was a doctor. Mm-hmm. She called your 2 ex-husbands.
Exactly.
One of whom is the father of your son. How old was Constantine then?
Constantine was 13.
I imagine this all happened really fast.
Yeah.
As the doctors were trying to work out what was wrong with you, when was the decision made for everyone to start getting on planes and coming to you?
Straight away, because I declined so fast. When Dr. Zach Turner said to the doctors at Massachusetts General, which is the Harvard Teaching Hospital, screen for parasites. When they did, that's when they found it. And if you look at the data around the number of cerebral malaria survivors, and there are 4 different kinds.
What is cerebral malaria?
Cerebral malaria is a version of the parasite that is passed by a female mosquito, but it attacks the bloodstream and it attacks the brain. And typically it starts populating in the body so fast that the decline of the person who gets it is fairly quick. And this was exactly 2 weeks from when I was bitten to when I'm in this hospital and ambulance there.
Is that a long time or a short time? Does it usually happen faster than that?
I don't know. And the reason why is because so few people survive this that the data is very limited. And unless doctors know to screen for the parasite, somebody would have died rapidly in a coma and no one know the cause of death. So the doctors at Massachusetts General didn't really even have a protocol or an outcome. My blood was 8% parasitic when they caught it.
I don't know anything, but that sounds like a lot.
Well, if all the blood in your body were 11, 12 liters of blood, and there's that much of it is a parasite, what that does is it causes all the things that filter your blood, your liver and your kidneys and your heart, to stop up because they can't process a parasite through it. So that created a blood infection that brought on severe septic shock. So it was like a 1-2 punch.
And it's like an avalanche.
Yeah.
So they try to, once they've worked out what it is, everyone's on a plane. What did they think they were going to see when they arrived? They were coming to say goodbye?
Yeah. And in this coma, I was declining so fast that there are on 3 instances in this coma that doctors called my family, Liz, before they arrived back and said she won't live through the night, say goodbye. So last rites were called 3 times.
Steph, what's it like being in a coma?
Weird. Very weird. I do have memories of the coma and being in the coma. I remember some good things and I remember some bad things.
What were the good things?
The good things, my aunt who lives in Florida and my brother in New York got themselves to Boston post haste, like as quick as they could. And my aunt knew that I loved the African spiritual that is in Sister Act 2. His Eye is on the Sparrow, the Lauryn Hill version. So she played it on the phone in my ear. And I remember singing along in my head, not sure why I could hear my brother and my auntie talking. And the song, I wasn't in any pain at that point, but I acutely remember that memory of hearing that song being played in my ear.
Do you remember people talking to you?
Yes. There was a part of the experience where Liz and her partner showed up first. So the first person on the scene was actually my brother and Liz's partner from Canberra. And then when he arrived, Liz and Chase were in my ear. And she was like, "We love you, Steph. Chase is here." And I just remember going, why the heck is she shouting? But they had given me a drug called methylene blue, and it turned me a purple, gray, blue color and given me 11 liters of fluid. So I was like a giant Michelin purple Smurf kind of looking person. I've seen the photos. Wow. They're terrible. But being that the back of my eyelids, because of this drug, if I attempted to open my eyes, I was seeing everything in this purple haze. And that was the coloring in my body. So I remember like looking and it was like gray, purple, but it was almost like being underwater with a shallow, like lying in the bottom of a shallow fountain. And people would stick their head in the fountain to speak to me. And that's Liz. And also my business partner, Fiona. She flew herself from Canberra to be by my bedside because she wanted to, she tells me, thank me for how I inspired her life, one, and to promise me to raise my son and look after my son too if I didn't make it. So she had come to say goodbye basically as well.
The things that people said to you, I mean, they always say talk to them, they might be able to hear you. Mm-hmm. Now we know that
they can.
They can. Were you scared?
When I woke up, yes. Well, there were 2 points of me being scared. The first one was that I heard 2 nurses talking over me. And to do daily maintenance on me, I'm not a small person, requires 2 people to turn me, etc. And at that time, I was, one, unable to move, and I was atrophied as well. So even if I wanted to move, I couldn't.
So atrophied means what? You were stiff?
It's like just deteriorated. Oh. So my muscles, when I woke up, were literally falling off of my body. Unrecognizable, but I had no strength. So they were working on me, doing the bathing ritual, changing my plumbing, how elegant, and they were speaking to each other. And one's asking the other if she's going to this end-of-life seminar next week. So that, I'm like, end of life, holy hell, am I in palliative care? So I heard this, and it was a trigger, so when I woke up, I was intubated, and so I couldn't ask any questions, but I had a burning one, and I wanted to know where the heck was I and what condition am I in? Am I dying?
So you had a tube down your throat so you couldn't speak.
No.
What did you see when you first opened your eyes?
A clock in front of me. And being that I couldn't move, there was no buzzer to call the nurse, and I'm paralyzed. So all I can do is kind of lie there. So the first thing I could open and move was my eyes. And I looked at this clock, and I thought that someone put a lead sheet on me, that I was stuck under a lead sheet, something heavy. I'm like, why can't I move anything? This is all my head. I'm like thinking, why can't I move anything? Why is there a lead sheet on me? Like all these questions. And, I didn't know then what I know now, that my body was paralyzed from the atrophy. But I looked at the clock, and I just started reciting affirmations in my head over and over and over again, and willing my body to move. And that was my first recollection of waking up. And it wasn't until one of the nurses noticed my eyes open, because they come in and they do their thing, not really cognizant of the state of the patient. But I was awake for the first 24 hours of coming out of that coma. My eyes were fixed on that clock.
And no one had noticed? Did you have any sense of how much time had passed?
No.
How much time had passed?
About close to 2 weeks.
When I think about your story and I think about your little boy getting on that plane and coming to see you, did he come to see you?
He did. The first time they were due to fly out of Sydney Airport, they got to the airport and they got a call that said there might not be any point. They were emailing Liz asking her, would she prefer to take me home in a box or in a jar, and sending her pricing. Like it was that was that kind of day. And then they said, well, wait a minute, you might as well come, because somebody needed power of attorney to make these kind of decisions. And unfortunately, my son's father was the person who held that decision.
And that's your ex-husband?
Yeah.
Did he come over with your son?
Yeah, he escorted him.
And I don't want to probe, but would we say that was an amicable situation? Not so amicable?
It was very weird to
I
wake up
imagine.
with him in the room.
Making the decisions about your life.
Well, it was kind of a collective decision between my business partner, my best friend, my mother, my brother, my auntie.
Okay.
So I had
So it was the committee.
a committee who decided that power of attorney was going to go to my son.
Okay.
So he would make the calls.
Can you have power of attorney when you're 13?
Well, no, but that he should lead the decision making, because he had the greatest impact.
Of course.
My then husband had already repartnered, so it wasn't as if he had my best interest at heart at that time.
That's an interesting thing for women who have ended marriages or relationships. How do people know who your power of attorney is? Is that something that's in your will? Where is that written down somewhere?
Well, it depends on what your legal status is, and we weren't legally divorced. So
it was just a default because you weren't legally divorced.
Yeah.
How is Constantine through all of this? Silly question. Were you still in a coma?
Yes, I was when he arrived. They prepared him. The really interesting fact,
Man.
Mia, and it's beautiful when I talk about, a mother-son bond and a mother to their children, regardless of gender. While I was in the coma, Constantine was sending voice notes to Liz to play back for me in the coma next to my ear. And he would tell me about his day and how excited he was to see me.
And you remember this?
Well, no, I don't remember it, but the doctors told me that when they were doing brain scans, they were finding me not responsive except for to my son's voice. So how powerful is that, even just in nature? And he says that he just never gave up hope that I wasn't going to pull through, and he had this incredible optimism. She's going to make it. I know her. She's going to make it. If there's a way, she's going to come back and come through.
Was there a moment that they realised you were going to be okay? Was there one moment, or was it just an evolution of slowly getting better?
Well, being okay is relative. The funny thing was that Massachusetts General Hospital didn't have artesunate, the drug that kills malaria, in the pharmacy.
So they don't see a lot of malaria. They don't-
Cerebral malaria,
tropical diseases.
But this is the Harvard Teaching Hospital. So that's significant in the story, because how serendipitous that I wound up getting sick where the best available medicine in the world possibly exists. So that was stroke of luck, maybe, but I
Yeah.
think I call it synchronicity.
Yeah.
But they didn't have this drug because they never had a patient present. So they had to call the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. We hear about the CDC all the time with COVID.
Yeah.
And then report the case and then request they send up the drugs. So the drugs had to be packed and freighted, airlifted up to Boston.
Because when you imagine someone being in hospital and critically ill, you don't think of the admin that goes on behind the scenes, like that they've got to get the drug and someone's got to approve the drug and someone's got to put the drug in a box and then the drug's got to be flown, and all of that happened. The drug worked to save your life.
That's what they were waiting on. Because while I went into septic shock as a secondary problem during the malaria, they had to get the drugs up. So while they're waiting for the drugs to arrive, it took 20 hours to diagnose me. But then from there, CDC contact, drugs packed, shipped, start giving them to me. That's when I was really declining. So in order for my life to be saved, they had to stabilize me enough to keep me from death by, getting the drugs as quick to me as possible. When did they know I was going to live? It wasn't really until I came out of the coma. And I was pronounced when I was awake malaria-free while still intubated. But I do know from some anecdotal chat in the ICU that I was on more drugs, me alone, than the entire every patient in the ICU combined. So I was the most highly dependent case that they had, and they really worried about what kind of cognitive damage I might have suffered, what my quality of life would be, how long it would take for me to have a quality of life that I knew again. It was all a giant we don't know crapshoot. Just waking up began kind of a real journey, if you would, and that's where I had a proactive role to play in it.
Did anyone have that conversation with you? We don't know how this is going to go from here, because as you explain it, they could deal with the malaria, but everything that had happened around the septic shock, it's not like that was fixed.
No.
That was then became the problem.
Exactly. When I woke up, my right hand and both feet were severely damaged and bandaged, and the pain was ridiculous. And what would need amputations or not, what would recover, how my organs, because I was on full life support. So renal, I was on dialysis every day. Everything was plugged into something. Which functions would I get back? Which ones wouldn't I? That was kind of a mystery.
Your insurance company was quite keen once you were stabilised to bring you back to Australia.
Oh, yeah.
So as you would say, the meter would stop running because American healthcare is rather prohibitively expensive. What happened to you when you got here? Where did you go and how did you feel about coming home?
Well, I was very nervous because I knew all my family live in the United States. And I was living in Canberra at the time with my son as a single mom. And I just knew I had no support there. So I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to go, And they were talking rehab. And I'm like, I'm not a drug addict. I don't need rehab. And they're like, medical rehab, darling. Very different. But what that period looked like, and one doctor at Massachusetts General said to me, it could take you up to 4 years before you resume a quality of life. And that's a finger in the air guess. So I was airlifted with a doctor, a nurse, and my half-sister as a support animal on Emirates back to Sydney Airport. We arrived late. I was ambulanced to Canberra Hospital, so 3.5 hours in a bus, and then installed in the emergency room at Canberra Hospital, waiting for the vascular surgeon to show up on Saturday morning at his leisure to decide what to do with me.
Is it true that a friend abducted you from the hospital and spirited you away to Sydney for a second
That's my business
opinion?
partner,
Your
Fiona,
business partner.
who flew to Boston. So she came one morning, and she's a very clever woman, and I love this woman to bits. She's truly an epitome of God's grace. She comes to hospital at 7 a.m. with coffees. She said, self-discharge. I'm like, can you even do that? She said, yeah. She said, I'll pick you up at 1. She showed up and,
And you couldn't walk.
I was in a wheelchair. So they took me out of the hospital in a wheelchair. She put me in the car and drove me down to Sydney. We stayed in the Intercontinental, so it was the first time I'd seen the outside in months.
How many months are we from when you first collapsed?
I collapsed on September 29th, 2019.
Yeah.
And I was en route for Sydney Hospital on the 5th of probably about 8th of November after Melbourne Cup, because I was in hospital for Melbourne Cup in Canberra.
How long had you been in Canberra Hospital before she
Less than a
spirited
week.
you away? Okay, you knew that was not the place for you.
Well, one, I shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah.
But secondly, his prognosis I wasn't certain about, and it was a bit of a big move if it wasn't required.
You wanted
And
a second opinion.
Exactly.
And you got one.
Exactly.
And what was that?
Well, it was that they could do some reconstructions. Dr. Ravi Hugel, who's a vascular at St. Vincent's, brought in a plastics guy, and they had a surgical approach to me. But because it was closing up to Christmas and it was such a big operation, like 20-hour surgery to do what they wanted, they didn't want to do it before Christmas.
What did your feet look like?
Oh, horrific. My toes and my heels were black. On the right foot, 70% of it was damaged. So all of the heels, the instep, the arch, and all 10 toes had, become black. But they weren't just like a blood blister black. They were black and then they were necrotic. So they were hard like wood. And, the body begins to separate. It's called demarcation. So whatever's dead kind of falls away from the living and healthy tissue. So over this time, we were really on guard for infection and trying to see what would happen. But none of the doctors wanted to operate before Christmas. So they kicked me out of St. Vincent's and sent me to Wolper right before Christmas of 2019.
Is it true that one of your toes fell off in your hand?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The
that
most
happened to
ridiculous.
you.
Yeah, it was nuts. I was changing bandages in Canberra, and I had to do this by myself because there were no community nurses to help me. And here we are changing bandages, and all of a sudden, my little toe on my left foot is gone. And my son came in. He's like, "We should go to the hospital." I said, "No, it's kind of like losing a tooth, I reckon." The body just gets rid of what it doesn't need.
That's very brave. But inside, were you dying?
Yeah, I was mortified. But,
Yeah.
my son was here. And rather than
Yeah.
freak him out, how I react to things certainly kicks off onto how he sees the world.
The tooth fairy would certainly be surprised
toe
by a
fairy?
toe.
A toe fairy?
I
I want the
reckon.
toe fairy.
And you need more money than just like a couple of bucks.
Exactly.
I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter with Stephanie Rodriguez. I was going to ask you, you were lying in hospital for a lot of time. Mm-hmm. You couldn't really do any rehab, could you? Because you couldn't stand on these necrotic, I imagine incredibly painful feet. When you were thinking about what your life was going to look like on the other side of this, what were you imagining? What were you hoping for?
I didn't know that, and no one knew, that the journey would take me to the point of losing both my feet. My objective, with the help of Dr. Gordon Slater, who's an orthopod here in Sydney, was to reclaim and keep as much as possible so that I'd have functioning feet. And that was the big, fat, hairy goal and what we tried to do over the course of 2020. While I was in hospital, I was having surgery almost every 10 days where we do more skin grafts, where we do more stretching of the skin. Like I had something that looked like corset laces around either side of my heel.
So they were trying to rebuild something.
Yeah. And just salvage. My doctor had the best of intentions, and he went through this as a real labor of love with me. I can't say enough good things about Dr. Slater and his patience. But we got to that year mark. And
After you first collapsed.
And I was in a wheelchair for all that time. So becoming able-bodied and then becoming damaged and then getting discharged from hospital around July of 2021. So all during the first lockdowns, I was locked up in Prince of Wales. My son was the only person allowed in to see me, so it was very lonely. Finally getting to go home with a wait and see, let's see what the tissue happens, regular doctor's appointments, daily nurses into my house to change bandages and manage for infection was just all, again, salvage mode, but trying to find life on the other side. But I was in excruciating pain. When you think about how great a foot massage feels, all those nerve endings severed. And then when they're starting to grow and fire and there's no place for them to go, is some of the most excruciating pain I have ever been in and would imagine someone to have.
You were in a wheelchair quite suddenly and unexpectedly. Was your house geared up for that?
Nope. But I am fortunate to live in a one-story apartment, and it has, flat floors, but some of it's carpeting, some of it's tile, some of it's hardwood. So, learning how to ambulate between the chair and bed, the chair and the shower, a few modifications easily, and then, would I be able to drive? And so, it's just kind of, figure it out. And, we kind of did. But my house was flat, so I was kind of lucky. But it was just learning how to do everything. And I didn't have a motorized wheelchair. So I had to be strong enough to push myself up a hill in the city. Or
even though the skin grafts, they took so much skin from around your arms and the muscle tone that you lost from all that time in a coma. When did someone first say your feet have got to go?
Well, that's what that Dr. Hacksaw said, but it didn't need to be up to my knee. He was a bit extreme and at the time overstating the possibility.
And you didn't trust him?
No, I didn't know him and I didn't trust him. But I also didn't like his bedside manner and his surgical approach. And it was very confronting to be on a vascular ward when every single person I'm looking at is missing parts. That's not helping me.
What's a vascular ward?
It's a surgical ward for doctors who cut off body parts. Like, think about diabetics who need to get their toes cut off. The guy who does that's vascular. Okay. So they're not specialized to feet or arms, a hand surgeon who's an orthopod. Vasculars are there to look at problems with the body and remove parts that are sick or unwell.
And when you came to Sydney and you tried all those operations, you'd had dozens of operations to try and reconstruct and salvage your feet, was it one doctor that had to say to you, hey, Steph, was it a bit of an intervention where someone had to say, we can't keep doing this if you want to walk?
Well, Dr. Slater had kind of got to the end of his tether with me. We'd done all these surgeries. He was so patient. And then when we did annual MRI, so it was February of 2021, and he got the results and he said, well, I think I've done everything I can from a surgical intervention, but you should talk to some plastic surgeons. And he referred me to 2 plastic surgeons here in Sydney to see about perhaps doing a giant graft, if you would, but a much bigger active graft, and then doing vascular surgery to fuse that with living organs and arteries to try to force revascularization in that area to make the veins work again. And I consulted with them at East Sydney Private, and they looked at my wounds and they talked, and I got a call from one of them after that in the evening about 8:30, and he said, Steph, I know you. And he said, I know that you want to walk more than anything. We could perhaps have a fairly good outcome on covering those bones, because my bones were literally sticking out of my heel. So to stand up with your bone hitting your shoe and the floor through a bandage. So the pain, as I said. So it was one, the amount of pain I was in, but secondly, the possibility of ambulation. And he's like, I don't want to talk you out of it, but I just know that you're not going to get the result you want, and I don't want you to hate me. So I had just gotten into NDIS, and thank God for NDIS. But one of the questions they ask is, what do you want? And what are your goals? And my goal was, 1, to walk again. The second question they ask is, who can help you do this? And then Professor Munjid Al-Muderis, who I'd seen at TEDx Sydney in 2015, his name pops in my head. And so I email his rooms and his private email, and I said, hey, Munjid, we met at TEDx Sydney 2015. Here's my story. Here's some pictures. What do you reckon? And I wanted him to give me robotic toes, because all I could see was me getting back on my feet again. I just couldn't see myself in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. And I know that other people, are very comfortable in those states, but for me, it just wasn't something I could wrap my head around. And being a single mom of a teenage boy who's active, we couldn't lead the life that we did or have the quality with me in a wheelchair, and what a burden I would be to my son. So I just wanted to walk. And within 10 minutes of sending that email, Mia, his rooms called me and said, he'll see you next week. So I went in, had a consult with him, and we sat there, and he looked through my bandages, looked at my MRI, shook his head and said, this is not, and Munjid has a very dry sense. He said, this is not the meaning you're hoping for. He said, I can't fix those feet. Just got to tell you. And he said, if you want to walk again, you must give me those, and I will have you upstanding and walking in 2 weeks. And I had been in a wheelchair for more than a year now. And so it wasn't, I took about 3 weeks to think about it. And being that there aren't any bilateral above ankle osteointegrated amputees in Australia, I didn't really have someone to ask for advice or to do my own research. There was no one to kind of tell me what life was going to be like. And I had to really just take that leap of faith, trust Munjid and his professionalism, and he's an amazing surgeon, that this was going to give me a different quality of life.
What did they do with your feet?
Oh, God, I have no idea. Hopefully, I don't care. I really don't care. I know somebody who's an osteo who actually has his in formaldehyde, and I think that's really gross. And they were unrecognizable,
Yeah,
Mia,
as
with no
feet.
toes. Like, when I would see them through bandages, it was kind of dysmorphia.
Yeah.
Like, they were there, but they weren't mine because they didn't look like me. So my brain really wasn't engaged with them as much as we love, and we look at our hands or our limbs and say, oh, my nails look nice. Like, there was nothing when I looked at my feet that I loved about them.
Had you been a pedicure girl before
Oh my gosh, yes.
and a shoe girl?
Oh,
I know this for a
indeed.
fact.
Yeah. So my shoe collection was enviable because I had been collecting for a long time. And I used to, when I traveled, and I just went to my 59th country in December, but I'd buy a pair of shoes as a souvenir. Because then when I wore them, and someone would go, oh, those are great. I could tell them, oh, I bought these here and I was doing this. And it would always be rather than shot glasses or whatever people collect, Chotskis, shoes were my thing.
What was the most you've ever spent on a pair of shoes?
Well,
Before these shoes that you wear now, what was the most you'd ever spent?
my ex-husband spent, I think, $5,500 on a pair of limited edition Dolce & Gabbana boots from Cosmopolitan back in the day when he was wooing me.
That's some serious wooing.
Yeah.
How many pairs of shoes do you reckon you had?
I would say close to 200 because I went through a boots phase and I owned a lot of boots, beautiful boots. And
And you liked heels.
yeah, I did like my heels.
So when he said, you need to give me those and I'll have you upstanding in 2 weeks, all I can think of is either prosthetic limbs that sort of strap to a stump or those things that Olympians and athletes run on, like those
Blades.
blades.
Yes.
But it wasn't either of those that you were talking about, was it?
No. And osseointegration is the fusion between robotic and metallic parts in the bone's natural tissue and structure. And, Munjid is one of the pioneering surgeons. So Australia is very lucky that this immigrant boat person came in and brought this innovation to Australia because there are very few doctors who do this in the world. And now, Australia is attracting surgeons who come and train with him. But this particular procedure is very much like Terminator surgery. It shows the extension of metal parts coming out of limbs. So one could find that a bit confronting to see. But the process involved fusing titanium rods to my tibias, which are that long bone that extends between your knee to your ankle. And, fusing those parts in, having them set there, having the bone grow around it to reinforce it. And at the end of that metal rod is where attachment, a housing is that attaches the prosthetic. So some of the benefits to the amputee, as I've learned, and I was never a stump amputee, that's what they're called, a stump amputee to upgrade to osseo. Osseo integration was my first move.
Okay.
And a lot of people go that long route.
Can you go from stump to
Yes, you can.
this?
Yeah.
But you went from amputation straight to this in the same. I imagine it was a
Yeah.
big operation.
It was, and that again, it's something to watch. And there's been media on those processes because I believe Munjid was Australian of the Year, like last year or the year before,
2020.
Yeah, so the media have covered him a lot, but that process of going in and severing someone's faulty limb or opening up an amputation site, going into the bone, fusing the bone, and then waiting for the skin to heal and the muscles to heal around it. One of the tips of my procedure was to take the nerve endings because our nerve endings in our leg run parallel down the inside and outside. So when they get down to the heel and where they had to cut them in what was my calf, they fused the right side and the left side together. So I have feedback now that sometimes, and even with phantom limb, if I press on the back of my leg, the skin that's there, and close my eyes, I can feel parts of my foot because the nerve endings that associate with that part of the foot are still in my body, and my brain remembers what that sensation feels like.
Podcasts are not a visual medium, and we've got video that we'll post as well. But if someone was looking at you, they would see your leg that finishes just above your ankle and a thick, probably the size of a 20-cent piece, titanium rod coming out. And then at the end of them are shoes. Today you've got a beautiful pair of leopard ballet flats on. Tell me about the aesthetics of what goes on at the end, because this isn't like blades. This isn't like some orthopedic situation. you've got shoes, you've got do you have different feet that clip onto those poles?
Well, I have 2 sets of feet, thanks to NDIS. One are my everyday legs, and they're adaptive, which are the ones I'm wearing today. So it's less about the shoes and more about the feet and the prosthetic.
Can you put different shoes on those feet?
Yeah. I just change my shoes like everybody else.
And you can just buy normal shoes?
Yeah. I'm a size 10. Anyone who's listening, I'm a size 10. Still am. Always will be.
Okay, so it's just a foot. Can I see the foot?
Sure.
Is it like, oh, you've got your Allen key?
Of course. Osseointegrated patients have to travel with an Allen key.
Oh, it's got a French pedicure. Beautiful.
Super fun to take those
I'm
into a
holding it
nail
now.
salon and scare the hell out of someone.
And it feels not unlike a foot.
No. It has a
Yeah.
silicone cover called
nice.
Cosmesis.
Do you actually get pedis? Do you take it off and give it
Yeah. So while I'm getting my nails done, I have them do my feet.
in another room?
Yeah.
If you want.
I'm the only one that can get a Brazilian and a pedicure at the same time in 2 different rooms. That's my joke.
So any shoe will fit onto this.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, like what's the word? It's not.
Adapt.
Yeah, you can't bend it.
Yeah, you can. So these are called adaptive.
Yeah.
And there are 4 different grades of amputees. There are K1, K2, K3, K4. K1 is a person who can't get out of their wheelchair. Mm-hmm. K2 is the ability to ambulate between 2 flat surfaces or 2 situations. There's 3 which can walk with aid of like a cane or crutches or something, walking assistance. And then there's K4s, which are athletes and kids, and I'm a K4. And because I'm a K4, which is active, like I sometimes do 10,000 steps a day, I needed better equipment than what I was issued with first. So NDIS have thankfully given me the equipment to have this set of legs that flex. You can see the change in that.
Yeah.
Allow me to change my incline. So that's how I wear heels, is at that pitch.
I
so when I'm not, because
see.
you see on a flat surface, but when I wear flats, I adjust them back and
And
put them
depending
in.
on how high the heel is,
I can only wear up to 70 mils with these. So I can't wear a full 100 like stiletto. I can wear kitten
Well,
heel.
that's not good enough. Steph, try
No,
harder.
okay, exactly. Just keep reaching. But the first day that I got
What was it
issued
like?
these, at my prosthetist APC in Alexandria, they had ordered these new feet in. They put them on me and they said, bring your heels. And so I put on a pair of old, work shoes in a kitten heel, a pair of pumps, and I walked in them for the first time. And I could have stacked it, and they were filming this, and it's on my Instagram, but it has over 1.5 million views of me walking in kitten heels for the first time. Thankfully, I didn't fall, but it was it was overwhelming because one of my goals was to resume as much of me as possible. And we women, shoes make our outfit, Men can throw in anything and it doesn't matter. And, we're not dressed without, well, most women, that they get pedicures and that's considered a part of the body that we
Self-care.
take care of.
Yeah.
So not having any toes to polish at first, but then having feet that didn't look ugly and disfigured like my old ones really changed the way I see these in my own head because, they're pretty well perfect. They won't
Yeah.
get a callus.
No.
No hangnails.
No blisters.
No blisters, no bunions, no corns. I'm just like, how lucky am I?
Did it take a long time to learn to walk? I mean, if I saw you walking down the street and you were wearing pants, it would never occur to me that you had prosthetic feet. Did it take a long time to learn how to do that?
The walking took place, like learning to stand and just walk was originally done in trainers. I spent 8 weeks intensively at Macquarie University every day with physios, learning to walk again, gait, balance, ambulation, all of this kind of stuff. And they were wanting to make sure that the surgery was being accepted into my body. It wasn't rejecting it, infection risks, that type of thing. So the first 8 weeks were like boot camp on learning to walk again at first. But then every time we switch my prosthetics, I then have to go back and retrain my body, my muscles, because I walk and drive from my hip flexors. So everything that normal people do, like when they flick their heel,
Yeah.
that's all driven from the ankle joint. Whereas my foot is attached to my knee. And so everything I do is from the hip. And
So you had to learn to walk again in a different way.
Yep.
And
And-
move again in a
yeah.
different way. Can you dance?
I can. I can, and I have on my TikTok. Actually, just recently. Yeah, my son and I made a TikTok for Valentine's Day. And
beautiful.
I think it's got about 2.6 million views on it right now, which is crazy.
Of you jumping out of a wheelchair
Yeah.
on your feet.
Well, he gives me my feet, which is very sweet. So, yeah, it's fun.
Just finally, Steph, what does life look like today? It's been just on 2 years since you were bitten by a mosquito. and your life completely changed. What's it like now?
Life is different, but not any less enjoyable. I've had to learn to do things differently. And, I was on a mission when we met, Mia, to impact 1 billion lives by 2025. I got benched. I got taken off the field and, away from that mission. And that was a real paradigm shift for me because I was so busy saving everybody that I did a very poor job of self-care. And, that showed up in other quadrants of my life, like my relationship quadrant, my physical quadrant, et cetera, on my neglect for myself. And, when we can't take care of ourselves, we can't really be our fullest for anybody else. And I wasn't raised with that kind of belief, self-care was selfish. And when I was going through this and the only person to save me was me, I really had to get real with my internal dialogue and become my best friend. I had to become my soul supporter. I had to really mentally prepare for the biggest, exercise of my life, if you would. And, now just to be at the other side of recovery, I'm always going to be in recovery. Every time I get a new pair of prosthetics, I'm going to have to retrain my body. I'm going to have good days. I'm going to have bad days. They could still get an infection, which happened in September. I was back in surgery. So it's not that it's ended. I just have to, allow myself to breathe, take time, be careful, be aware of my body, really, cherish the temple by taking care of it. All the Pilates I do and people see on social is all the work I have to do. It's not optional. In order for me to regain and keep my body in the condition that can function, I have to put the work in. And that's new for me to be that disciplined because I wasn't before. But, I'm excited because in this new body, if you would, this augmented body. It's still mine, but it's changed. It's given me a new set of opportunities, and people now lean into the story, and I'm able to help more people through my experience. And that's been a part of the collateral beauty, as I call it, is, finding and seeing good where we often, see only the bad. And yes, I'm permanently augmented and I look different.
You're off to do a TED Talk now.
Yeah, my first one. It's just really beautiful. When I was in Nigeria, when I got bitten, I met this amazing woman at the conference I was speaking at, and she's a coach. And we just had this great kismet, and we wanted to work together. And we agreed to, and then she didn't hear from me for 2 months while I was in hospital and unable to open my laptop.
Trying not to die.
Yeah. And so when I finally reached out to her, I said, I'm not ready yet. But in helping me to get back into the framework mentally of getting back to work and recovery and restoration, we started working together. And she's a TED fellow, and she nominated me for this TED. And she's like, you're ready. And I said, no, I'm not ready. She said, you're ready. And she kind of shoved me into this.
You're changing women's lives.
And so she said, you must do this. And so I said, okay. We supplied our application, video, and the 700-word essay. And we found out in December that we were listed as one of the speakers for this event. So on the 9th of March, I am off to South Africa to give a TED Talk for TEDx Littleton Women. But because of this and the work that we've done, now on the 25th of November, which was the UN Day for the Eradication of Violence Against Women, we launched an initiative called Be the Beacon. And it's really getting businesses and people sporting codes to stand up to end gender-based violence. And that's cyberbullying everywhere in every facet that a woman or those identifying in that sphere can be protected, and people actually taking an active stance, because I believe that versus all the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, some of them require a lot of societal change and infrastructure, money, government ruling. Like ending gender-based violence, ending violence against women and girls is a choice. And I believe that we can decide enough is enough. And if we all pull together, like recycling, we can do this. So the Be the Beacon campaign launch, which was November 25th, because of this trip and the awareness around it, we've been asked to go to Lesotho, which is a country inside South Africa, as a guest of Her Majesty the Queen. We're going to do a groundbreaking ceremony of a women's center for survivors of genital mutilation. And that still is a problem in Africa, which is just horrific to think in these times that this still exists. As well as I'm going to be a guest in a women's FC football club invitational. So there's a bunch of really exciting things. I'm going to get to talk to women's groups, some girls in STEM about, careers in tech, because I am a tech entrepreneur, and get to spread the message further in collaboration with other nonprofits in Africa. So it'll be about a 10-day trip.
Have you got your malaria drugs packed?
I do. I have indeed. And everything else, we've done a full top to bottom vaccination review to make sure that I've got all the prophylaxis I need. And at worst case scenario, I'll wear a hazmat suit, but nothing's going to stop me from, that opportunity to spread that message and that idea about finding collateral beauty that I learned through this ordeal.
Go get him, Stephanie Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Steph is the most amazing person. I first met her when she came to see me about her invention, which is the personal alarm for women, which is extraordinary. We'll link to it in the show notes because it has so many applications for women traveling or women who are in situations of family violence or just women who are going about living their lives. But she's also writing a memoir. It's called Thank You, Mrs. Carter, and there's a link to the first chapter in our show notes if you want to get a taste. There's also some video on the Mamamia social media page on Instagram and also on my Insta page if you want to see Steph's incredible bionic feet. No Filter is produced by Gia Moylan and the executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. And here's a thing to know, just by listening to this podcast and this interview that I did with Steph, you are helping to fund girls to go to school in some of the most disadvantaged countries in the world through our partnership with Room to Read. We are currently funding 300 girls to go to school every single day, and our aim is to get to 1,000. So if you want to help us get there, tell more people about this show and consider becoming a Mamamia paid subscriber. There'll be a link to our show notes in that as well. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll speak to you soon.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.